Hello. So for this lesson critique, we're talking about writing on social networks. So overall, I found this lesson plan to be very cohesive. This opening page that we see right here shows you a little bit of a synopsis of what the lesson plan will be about, which I find it very interesting. It gives you the objectives, the time, and what you will need. And then once you open up the lesson plan, it'll give you all of that again as well, and it gives you also the levels of um, English for students. So starting off with this, I found the warm up to be pretty cohesive. You know, it's not too difficult, and it gets students to kind of relax and talk about this social networks if they might not be aware of them on the application. For example, they might not know what LinkedIn is, or some of them might know what Facebook is, and therefore they can explain to each other what these social networks are and what they're useful for. Um, After that, it says right here, elicit for feedback. So you kind of want to make sure they understand what these social medias are used for, and get them more comfortable around the topic so they can talk a little bit more about it as they go throughout the lesson. So the first task is with the student handout 2, which is this part right here, which shows a little bit of comments, posts and comments of friends having conversations about different topics. Um, this is more of a reading exercise than writing, in my opinion. So as well, in writing things, you have to make sure you understand the process of reading, so your audience can understand what you're writing, and they can understand it and reply back to it, dealing with social networks. So I think it's interesting that they added a reading factor to this lesson plan, in order to make sure that the students can understand what's going on throughout these conversations up here. So I actually like that about it. I do think that that could be narrowed down, and necessarily you don't really need to have this worksheet overall. This could be talked about it in class, so you could be like, so in this post right here, what are we talking about here? What do you see here? And then it could be like, oh, I noticed that Mark comments in a lot of these, and he posts some of his own posts as well about his daughter. So that reading worksheet could be narrowed down to just talking about it in class, but it is useful for individual work, which says right here that the students should do it on their own. Um, I believe I thought it did. Oh, no, it looks like they do it together. So that, I mean, in a way, it's good for CLT. But this could also be used in a way of CLT as doing communication with the whole class, and discussing it within the whole class, or even in small groups, not just in pairs. So, oh yeah, it's right here. The Yes, to complete it on their own. So yeah, so this could be avoided by using it as a whole class conversation. So moving on to the commenting part, this says that the students have to comment back pretending that they're friends with the people on the posts, and tell them to write their responses on the boxes. Um, and then it says you could also encourage the students to correct each other's messages. Um, I find that to be important, because not only will they be able to create their own posts later on, but right here, before you dive them into something bigger, like writing their own posts, they're getting to comment back on a topic that's already given to them. So they don't have to be overwhelmed or overexposed to a topic yet, because this is only um, third the third part of the activity that they're doing on their own. So I found this interesting. You know, I think it's important that the students are able to um, reply and understand any given conversation, regardless if it's like here, a party, or weather, or just a joke. You know, it's important that the students can understand any kind of different topics. Moving on to the writing, it says right here that you can create your own post and have the classmates comment on the post too. Um, I think it's not necessary to have computers, and if we're being realistic, most places won't have a lot of computers for students to use all at the same time for bigger classes. So doing it on paper would be more realistic, and thus we wouldn't need to any of this really. Um, I think it's important to also right here that this is also given to them, which is a little bit of ideas they can brainstorm about and use as a kind of focus on what their post might be, because always brainstorming about ideas might be a little bit difficult. So I think it's interesting that and important that this lesson plan concludes to putting up some ideas already so the students don't struggle finding ideas on their own to talk about. Um, and then, as well as this, I like the idea that other students are also commenting on everyone's posts. Um, I think I'm not sure if it's stated here, um, but when it's full, make sure the paper goes back to the person of the original comment. I think it'd be more interesting if the students were able uh, to make sure that the student goes along with their paper. It says right here, when it's full, make sure that the paper goes back to the person who wrote the original comment. I think the person of the original post should go around and find friends to fill up their post. So it's not just like a random paper floating around, because they might not know who it is, and who wrote the comment if they didn't name their post. So I think it's important that the student goes along with their own post and walks around in class asking other students, because um, at the same time, they might get the same people to comment on each other's. So I think it's also important that they said that they try to get it until the handout is full. So they're not only going, hopefully, to their own friends, but they're also going to other students of the class um, that they might not feel comfortable talking to as much. I also like the editing here, that the fact that you can get students to correct each other's mistakes and learn from each other. And then um, it's finally, I think it's important that you also at the end, to close out the lesson, make sure you go over some common mistakes and some common posts, relating to whatever trending topics are going on right now in social medias, and kind of close out the lesson plan by um, commenting on what the students wrote and the common errors that are used as well throughout the posts for learning purposes, but as well as for just basic understanding of the lesson plan and for future writing purposes via social media.